minutes to play.
And a turnover, and that can
Ravish the Raptors 905.
I can guarantee you that, as it turns out.
He's fecking pathetic. That sounds like something a rival might scream about Andrew Toney after he tore their defense apart one more time. But the ugliest words about Andrew Toney did not come from an angry fan in Boston. They did not come from a rival player either. They came from his own team, after his feet started to break down and the Philadelphia 76ers looked at their own scorer and decided he might be lying about the pain. Near the end of the 1984-85 season, Toney felt sharp pain in both of his feet. Team doctors checked him again and again. They said they could not find anything wrong. And as this story starts to show why old rivals still speak his name with pain, use the hype feature and give this video hype, because Andrew Toney's story deserves to be pushed back into the light. Toney had just signed a 7-year deal worth $5 million, and the front office started to whisper that maybe he just did not want to play anymore. They put him on the injured list, but not for an injury. They called it a bad attitude. They told him to come back and prove it. A doctor for the team used a phrase that still sounds cold today. He called it a trial by battle. Toney went back out and played hurt, because that is what a trial by battle demands. Later, doctors found the truth. He had stress fractures in both feet. He had bone spurs eating away at his ankles. The team he helped carry to a championship had pushed him to fight through broken bones. That is the real story hiding behind the insult on the screen. This is not a clean hero tale. This is the story of a scorer who legends still talk about with fear in their voice, and a team that could not tell the difference between pain and an excuse. Because here's the strange part. This is the same man that Boston Celtics legends could not sleep over. Danny Ainge, a tough young guard for Boston, once said Andrew Toney kept him awake at night more than Michael Jordan did. Larry Bird, one of the greatest players ever, respected Toney enough to call him one of the few shooting guards who caused him real fear. Robert Parrish watched him torch the Celtics in the biggest games of his career. Boston fans and Boston writers gave him a nickname that has lasted for decades. They called him the Boston Strangler. So which is it? Was Andrew Toney a terrifying scorer who legends still fear in their memories? Or was he a short and painful flash that got remembered bigger than it should be because it happened to hurt the right team at the right time? This story is going to walk through both sides. It will show you why he scared some of the toughest defenders in basketball history. It will also show you why his own team turned on him, why his career ended early, and why his silence afterward made his legend grow even bigger than his stat sheet. Here's why the whole thing feels strange from the start. Andrew Toney is not remembered the way Magic Johnson is remembered. He is not remembered the way Julius Erving or Michael Jordan is remembered. His numbers do not scream legend. He played from 1980 to 1988. He scored 9 points a game for his career. He shot 50% from the field. He handed out 2 assists a game. He made 2 All-Star teams. He won 1 championship. He only played in 468 regular season games before his career ended. He retired at age 30. Those numbers do not look like the resume of a player who is supposed to haunt legends for the rest of their lives. A 2-time All-Star with under 500 games played does not usually get a nickname like the Boston Strangler. That is what makes this story strange. The fear he created does not match the size of his career on paper. So why did the fear survive long after his career ended? He hurt the right team. He did it in the most famous arena in the sport. He did it in the biggest moments the playoffs could offer. He did it against the Boston Celtics again and again, when Boston thought the Eastern Conference belonged to them. A short career filled with a few brutal nights against the right rival can create a myth that outlives a normal, long career filled with quiet numbers. That is the real question hanging over Andrew Toney. Was he truly one of the most feared scorers of his era, or did he just happen to strike fear into the right group of legends at the right time and let their memories do the rest of the work? To understand how he built that fear, you have to go back to where it started. You have to go back to Birmingham, Alabama, long before the bright lights of the NBA. Andrew Toney was born in Birmingham, Alabama. His father, Ernest James Toney, worked as a steelworker. That kind of job builds a certain kind of person. It is not glamorous, it is not soft. It teaches a person to show up every single day and do hard work without complaining. Andrew Toney grew up watching that example, and it shaped how he approached basketball. At Glenn High School, Toney was already a scoring machine. As a junior, he averaged 31 points a game. As a senior, he averaged 37 points a game. In one regional tournament game, he scored 68 points by himself. His high school team finished with an 80-14 record during his time there. He was named Mr. Basketball in the state of Alabama. Those are the kind of numbers that make college coaches drive across state lines just to watch one game. But it was not only his scoring that stood out. There was a moment that showed who Toney really was as a leader. A student named Sandra Murray wanted to join the boys' varsity basketball team, which was an unusual and difficult thing to do at that time. Toney was the team captain. Instead of causing a distraction or letting his teammates create drama about it, he helped get approval from the locker room. He kept the team focused instead of divided. That single choice says a lot about how he carried himself. He did not seem loud or flashy off the court. He seemed controlled, almost quiet, even as he was breaking scoring records. That quiet control would follow him for the rest of his life, on the court and off it. After high school, Toney chose to attend the University of Southwestern Louisiana. He played under coaches Jim Hatfield and Bobby Pascal. Both coaches noticed something rare in him. He had extreme self-discipline. He set goals and then quietly worked until he reached them. He finished his entire undergraduate degree in only 3.5 years. He was already taking graduate classes during his final semester of college, while he was still playing basketball at a high level. He set 9 different school records during his time there. He finished his college career with 2,526 total points, which at the time ranked 13th all-time in the history of college basketball. He averaged 23, 6 points per game for his career, and 26, 1 points per game in his senior season. He was named a first-team All-Southland Conference player 3 separate times. One moment from his junior year explains everything about how his mind worked under pressure. His team was facing the University of Nevada, Reno, and the game came down to the final seconds. Toney stepped to the free throw line and calmly made both shots to win the game 73-71. After the game, a reporter asked him how he handled pressure like that. Toney said he actually liked pressure because it built up his blood. That single quote sounds strong. It sounds like the kind of thing a fearless competitor says. But looking back, it is also a warning sign. A man who genuinely enjoys pressure is also a man who will push through pain and discomfort long after he probably should stop. That mindset made him great in college. Years later, that same mindset would push him to keep playing on feet that were already broken. The Philadelphia 76ers picked Andrew Toney 8th overall in the 1980 NBA draft. He walked into a locker room that already had Julius Erving and Maurice Cheeks in it, 2 players who were already respected across the league. That could have been intimidating for a rookie. Instead, Julius Erving took Toney under his wing and helped him adjust to the speed and physical nature of the professional game. Toney did not come into the league to sit quietly and learn from the sidelines. He came in ready to score. At the time, most bench players were seen as backup pieces, guys who filled minutes so starters could rest. Toney changed that idea. He turned the bench scorer role into something dangerous. The research on his career describes him as one of the players who helped create the modern idea of instant offense, meaning a player who comes off the bench and immediately starts scoring in bunches without any warm-up period needed. He had a look about him that stood out. He wore his socks pulled up just below his knees. He laced his sneakers tight. He played with a calm, locked-in expression that rarely changed, whether he was up by 20 or down by 10. That quiet, unreadable face was often mistaken by opponents and reporters as coldness or a bad attitude. In reality, it was simply his version of focus. But that public image, the idea that he was distant and hard to read, would end up working against him later, when his own franchise had to decide whether to trust him during the biggest crisis of his career. His rookie numbers were strong right away. He averaged 12, 9 points a game on 49, 5% shooting, almost all of it coming off the bench. He finished 7th in voting for Rookie of the Year, an incredible feat for a bench player in his first season. Then an opportunity opened up. Lionel Hollins, one of the team's guards, got hurt, and Toney was thrust into a much bigger role. He did not shrink from it. During the 1981 Eastern Conference Finals, he set a rookie record by scoring 134 total points across the series. That record has never been broken. He was not supposed to be the face of that Philadelphia team. Julius Erving was the face of the franchise. Maurice Cheeks ran the offense. But in the biggest moments in the playoffs, when everything mattered most, Toney started pulling attention away from the bigger names on his own team. That tension between being a role player and being the most feared scorer on the floor would define the rest of his career. To really understand why legends still talk about Andrew Toney with fear in their voice, you have to understand exactly how hard he was to guard. This is where the basketball becomes the whole story. Sidney Moncrief was a two-time Defensive Player of the Year. He is one of the most respected defenders of his generation. When Moncrief compared guarding Michael Jordan to guarding Andrew Toney, his answer surprised a lot of people. He said that when you guarded Jordan, there were things you could actually study and prepare for. Jordan liked to attack the baseline. Jordan leaned toward using his right hand. Jordan had a small shoulder movement right before he rose up for his jump shot, something Moncrief could watch for and react to. Toney gave defenders none of that. Moncrief said Toney had no clear pattern at all. He could post up smaller guards down low. He could drive hard to his left. He could drive just as hard to his right. He could pull up for a jump shot after only 2 dribbles. From either side of the floor, he could catch the ball and shoot immediately from three-point range without hesitation. There was no habit to study. There was no weak hand to force him toward. Defenders could not shade their positioning one way because Toney would simply punish them going the other way. This does not mean Toney was a better overall player than Michael Jordan. He was not, and nothing in this story should be read that way. But in a single matchup on a single night, some defenders genuinely found Toney harder to predict than Jordan, simply because Jordan gave you something to study and Toney gave you nothing at all. Michael Cooper backs this up. Cooper was the defensive anchor of the Los Angeles Lakers during their Showtime years, an 8-time member of the NBA All-Defensive Team. Cooper said Toney used physical contact as a weapon rather than something to avoid. Toney stood 6'3" and was built with real strength in his upper body. If a defender tried to bully him or get physical to throw him off his rhythm, Toney would simply meet that physicality head-on. Cooper said Toney was willing to put the ball down and fight for position rather than back away. That completely removed a defender's ability to intimidate him. On March 7, 1982, Toney proved this in the most direct way possible, scoring 46 points against Cooper and the Lakers using a mix of physical post-ups and accurate mid-range pull-up shots. Danny Ainge, who would go on to be one of Toney's biggest rivals in Boston, described him the same way. Ainge called Toney an aggressive and physical scorer, with what he described as an assassin's mentality. Ainge said Toney was not just trying to score against defenders, he was trying to punish them while he did it. Stacey King, another respected voice from that era, said something that adds weight to Toney's legacy. King believed that if Toney had stayed healthy through his prime, his shooting mechanics were clean enough and advanced enough that he could have ended up ranked among the greatest pure shooters the game has ever seen. The skill was completely real. Nobody who faced him disputes that. But because his career ended so early, his entire legend rests on the memories of the men who had the misfortune of guarding him, rather than on a long stretch of dominant seasons that anyone can simply look up. That is part of what makes Andrew Toney such a strange figure in NBA history. His myth depends on trust in other people's fear, not on a mountain of games and stats built up over a decade. If there is one place where that fear became something bigger than basketball, it was Boston. No arena in the NBA feared Andrew Toney the way Boston Garden did. Boston sports writers gave him a nickname that has outlived his entire playing career. They called him the Boston Strangler, because of how often he choked the life out of the Celtics in games that mattered most. Toney himself never acted like the building scared him. He once joked that the old, creaky floor at 150 Causeway Street did not bother him at all. He said that the moment he walked out of the visiting locker room, he was already in shooting range. That is not the kind of thing a nervous player says about the most hostile road environment in basketball. Danny Ainge entered the league as a rookie in 1981, and Toney wasted no time introducing himself. Ainge later said that Toney welcomed him to the NBA by scoring on him at will, again and again, creating memories that stuck with him long after both men had retired from the game. The peak of this rivalry, the single moment that built the entire Boston Strangler legend, happened during Game 7 of the 1982 Eastern Conference Finals. The 76ers had blown a 3-1 series lead against the Celtics, which meant they had to walk into Boston Garden for a win-or-go-home Game 7 in what was already one of the most hostile buildings in professional sports. The atmosphere before the game was as intense as it gets. 5 spectators showed up wearing white sheets, with the names of Celtics legends written on them. Julius Erving later admitted that the sight gave him a brief jolt of fear, because it visually resembled the imagery of a hate group. That is how far Boston was willing to go to rattle the 76ers before the ball was even tipped. Early in the first quarter, Celtics forward ML Carr slapped Andrew Toney across the face during a shot attempt. It was blatant and physical. Toney had struggled in the 2 previous games, shooting only 7 for 31 combined in games 5 and 6, which meant Boston likely thought they had rattled him and found a weakness. Instead of getting angry or shrinking from the moment, Toney simply looked at Carr and smiled. Then he went to work. Toney scored 34 points that night, shooting an incredible 14 for 23 from the field. The 76ers blew Boston off their own home floor, winning 120-106. The moment became so lopsided and so humiliating for Boston that their own crowd started chanting "Beat LA." Near the end of the game, essentially giving up on their own team and rooting for Philadelphia to go win the championship instead. Think about how that looks from the outside. A cold nickname, the most hostile building in the league, a slap across the face, a smile instead of anger, a must-win Game 7, a total blowout, a home crowd that surrendered before the final buzzer. That combination of events is almost too perfect, almost too cinematic to be real. That is exactly why the story lived on for decades. But it also means a huge part of Toney's entire legend is built on his history with one single rival, rather than a wide body of dominance spread across the whole league. And Boston was not just one bad night for Toney. It was a pattern that repeated itself across multiple playoff series. In Game 1 of the 1981 Eastern Conference Finals, played in Boston, Toney scored 26 points on 8 of 18 shooting, adding 4 assists, 4 rebounds, and 2 steals. In Game 2 of that same series, also in Boston, he exploded for 35 points on 11 of 23 shooting, with 7 assists and 7 rebounds. A year later, in Game 2 of the 1982 Eastern Conference Finals, again in Boston, he scored 30 points on 13 of 22 shooting. In Game 4 of that same series, he dropped 39 points on a blistering 14 of 21 shooting, and then came Game 7, the 34-point performance that sealed his nickname forever. Game after game, series after series, Toney kept showing up in the exact same nightmare for the city of Boston. It is easy to understand why Celtics legends still speak his name with something close to dread. Even all these years later, he did not just beat them once. He kept coming back and doing it again in the exact building where they thought they were untouchable. The fear Toney created in Boston was not limited to the players who had to guard him directly. It spread through the entire organization, all the way up to the front office. Pat Williams, a longtime executive around the league, once recalled asking Danny Ainge a simple question. He asked Ainge which player worried him the most heading into the playoffs. Most people expected Ainge to name someone like Magic Johnson or Julius Erving, 2 of the biggest superstars of that entire era. Instead, Ainge said Andrew Toney was the player who kept him awake at night. That answer became one of the most repeated compliments of Toney's entire career. A tough, competitive Celtic, admitting that one specific 76ers guard bothered him more than 2 Hall of Fame legends combined. Tiny Archibald, another respected voice from that Celtics-76ers rivalry, later reflected on just how personal and fierce that competition became. He said Toney embodied the hatred between the 2 franchises during that era. He praised Toney's toughness directly, and he understood exactly why Boston fans and writers had given him the nickname the Boston Strangler, ML. Carr, the same player who slapped Toney across the face in that famous Game 7, later admitted something important about defending him. Carr said Toney's ability to pass out of double teams made him even more dangerous than his scoring alone suggested. Defenses could not simply load up extra defenders on Toney whenever he touched the ball, because he was smart enough to find the open man and punish teams for sending help. That made the entire Philadelphia offense more dangerous whenever Toney had the ball in his hands. Boston's front office cared enough about stopping Toney that they made a major roster move specifically because of him. Before the 1983-84 season, Celtics president Red Auerbach traded away Rick Roby to the Phoenix Suns in order to acquire Dennis Johnson, a 5-time member of the all-defensive first team. Auerbach made that trade because Boston needed a defender who would not fold under Toney's physical style of play. Toney respected Dennis Johnson as a smart defender, but he did not think Johnson could fully stop him. Toney said Johnson simply did not have the lateral quickness needed to truly contain him. In Toney's own opinion, the only defender in the league with enough familiarity to actually limit his scoring was T.R. Dunn. Larry Bird rarely called out individual opponents in public, which makes his comments about Toney stand out even more. According to the research, Bird stated that outside of Michael Jordan, Andrew Toney was the only shooting guard in the league who genuinely caused him real competitive fear. Bird was on the floor for that brutal 34-point Game 7 performance in 1982. Separately, Bird also called Toney one of the best players he had ever faced, someone who frustrated him more than almost anyone else across his long career. Robert Parrish lived through those same battles between the Celtics and the 76ers in the early 1980s. He watched Toney take over playoff games up close, standing right there in the middle of the pain that defined the 1982 Eastern Conference Finals. Years later, Celtics legend Cedric Maxwell, while hosting his own basketball podcast alongside Tiny Archibald, revisited Toney's dominance during that era. Together, they discussed why the Boston Strangler remained one of the most feared names in Celtics history, decades after Toney's playing days had ended. The fact that grown men were still talking about it on a podcast long after retirement shows that the frustration Toney created never really faded with time. All of this supports the idea behind the title of this story. NBA legends genuinely hated facing Andrew Toney because he made defense feel unfair and impossible. But keep the doubt in mind too. Legends remember him with fear mainly because he struck them in a handful of massive high-stakes moments. That does not automatically prove he belongs among the greatest shooting guards of all time. It proves he was terrifying in short, painful bursts against one very specific rival. Before the 1982-83 season, Philadelphia owner Harold Katz made a trade that changed everything. He sent Caldwell Jones and a first-round draft pick to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Moses Malone, who had just been named the league's most valuable player. Malone joined a roster that already had Julius Erving, Maurice Cheeks, and Andrew Toney. Head coach Billy Cunningham built his entire system around defensive rebounding and fast breaks, using Malone's dominance in the paint to create wide-open lanes for Toney to attack in transition. Before the playoffs even started, Malone made a bold prediction that basketball fans still repeat today. He said the Sixers would sweep every single round of the playoffs, 4 games and out, 4 games and out, 4 games and out. People called it the faux prediction. The Sixers did not hit that exact mark, but they came close, storming through the playoffs with a 12-1 record and sweeping the Los Angeles Lakers to win the 1983 NBA Finals. During that championship run, Toney averaged 18, 8 points and 6 assists per game. In the finals sweep specifically, his perimeter scoring was a key piece of the puzzle. Lakers head coach Pat Riley was impressed enough to call Toney the most resilient clutch shooter in all of professional basketball, high praise from a rival coach whose team had just been swept. Toney's numbers in the finals stand out even today. He averaged 24, 4 points per game across his NBA Finals appearances, a mark that ranks 23rd all-time. That places him ahead of Hall of Fame names like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Dwyane Wade in that specific category. Between 1981 and 1988, Toney was one of only 3 guards in the entire league alongside Walter Davis and Byron Scott to average at least 15 points a game while shooting over 50% from the field and making more than 100 three-pointers. Years later, Moses Malone even argued that the 1983 championship Sixers could have beaten Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls teams from the 1990s, pointing directly to Toney's physical style on the perimeter as a major advantage. That championship run stands as the strongest proof that Andrew Toney was not simply a Boston-created myth. He did it on a title-winning team, in the brightest spotlight the sport offers. But even here, in his greatest moment, he was not the biggest star on the floor. The team had Moses Malone in the middle. It had Julius Erving as the face of the franchise. It had Maurice Cheeks running the show. Toney was lethal, dangerous, and completely necessary to that championship. But he was one powerful piece inside a much bigger machine, not the engine driving the whole thing by himself. This is where the story turns dark again, because the same body that carried him through that championship run was already starting to fail him. Near the end of the 1984-85 season, only 2 years after that title, Toney began to feel severe pain in both of his feet. The 76ers medical staff examined him over and over, and each time they came back with the same answer. They said there was no structural damage. With no clear diagnosis to point to, the front office, led by owner Harold Katz, began to question whether Toney simply did not want to play anymore, especially since he had recently signed a 7-year contract worth $5 million. In their eyes, a player with that much guaranteed money had a financial reason to fake an injury. The organization placed Toney on injured reserve, but they did not frame it as an injury. They openly called it a bad attitude problem. They threatened him with suspension if he continued to refuse to play. Team Dr. Joseph Torg eventually made a public statement demanding that Toney return to the court, describing the process using a phrase that still sounds shocking today. He called it a trial by battle. A local newspaper columnist named Stan Hochman criticized that phrase harshly, calling it a cold and money-driven way to force an injured star back onto the floor before the playoffs began. Toney went back out and tried to play through it. What doctors eventually discovered after the damage was already done was that he had bilateral stress fractures in both feet, along with severe bone spurs eating away at his ankles. Forcing him to keep playing on broken bones caused permanent structural damage. He lost the explosive first step that had made him so dangerous for years. He played only 6 total games during the entire 1985-86 season. He retired in 1988 at only 30 years old, having played just 468 regular season games across his whole career. There is a modern parallel worth pointing out here, because it shows this was not just one unlucky situation. Decades later, guard Markelle Fultz went through something eerily similar with the same franchise. Fultz had physical limitations that team doctors initially could not certify as a real injury. That uncertainty led to public speculation that the real problem might be mental rather than physical. Eventually, Fultz's own representatives pulled him away from the team to see outside specialists, who correctly diagnosed him with a condition called thoracic outlet syndrome. The pattern repeated itself. A talented player in pain, a medical staff unable to find the answer, and a public rush to question the player's honesty instead of his body. This part of the story is not about doubting that Toney was truly injured. The medical proof came later and it was real. This part of the story is about how his clean hero narrative fell apart. His career did not end because he lost a fight on the court. It ended because his own team stopped trusting him at the exact moment he needed them the most. He never got a real second act. He became a permanent what if. And stories built on what if often grow bigger over time, because that kind of player never has to go through a slow, visible decline in front of everyone. After his career ended, Toney pulled away almost completely. He refused to attend team events. He would not speak to local reporters. He would not even walk into the Spectrum, the building where he had once been unstoppable. His remaining pain was severe enough that he could only play recreational basketball 2 or 3 times a month. Billy Cunningham, his old coach, called it a tragic end to what should have been a brilliant, long career. The city of Philadelphia itself became divided over the entire situation, with some fans blaming the front office and others believing the team's version of events. In 2008, the 76ers planned a halftime ceremony honoring the 1983 championship team, with Toney meant to be the centerpiece of the tribute. He declined the invitation over email without giving any explanation. Former general manager Pat Williams later said that Toney simply did not want to stand in front of a room full of journalists again. A former team executive named Tim Malloy described Toney using a striking comparison, calling him the James Dean or John F. Kennedy of Philadelphia sports, a talented figure frozen in time, forever remembered exactly as he was in his prime. Toney finally returned to Philadelphia in 2012, appearing at a reunion of the 1983 championship team during a game against, fittingly, the Boston Celtics. So what do you do with a career like this? Andrew Toney scared legends because he was strong, cold under pressure, endlessly skilled, and almost impossible to read as a defender. He hurt Boston in moments that mattered more than almost any other regular season game ever could. He made some of the best defenders of his generation feel completely helpless on the floor. He helped the 76ers win a championship, playing a real and necessary role next to Moses Malone and Julius Erving. His short prime, brief as it was completely real. Nobody who guarded him disputes that. But his legacy is not clean, and it never will be. He did not last long enough to build the kind of resume that silences every doubter. He did not stack 10 or 15 seasons of dominant numbers the way the truly all-time great guards did. His entire story depends heavily on memory, on pain, and on one specific rivalry that happened to be filmed, written about, and repeated for decades. The Sixers' own medical failure turned a former champion into a ghost who vanished from the game at 30 years old. Boston's hatred of him made the legend bigger than it might have been otherwise. His long silence afterward, The refusal to show up for 2 decades made the myth grow even larger, because a man who disappears becomes more interesting than a man who stays and slowly fades in front of everyone. Every piece of this story pulls in 2 directions at once. He was feared by Boston, yet doubted by his own front office in Philadelphia. He was quiet and controlled off the court, yet violent and physical with the ball in his hands. He had a short career, yet somehow built a massive myth around it. He was a great scorer, yet he never got the chance to prove long-term greatness. He was loved by Sixers fans who watched him fight through pain, yet hurt badly by the same Sixers management that was supposed to protect him. He is remembered today as a killer on the court, yet in many ways he stayed frozen in time, forever 30 years old, forever wearing that 76ers jersey in old highlight footage. That contradiction is exactly why this story matters. If Andrew Toney had simply played 15 quiet, solid seasons and slowly faded away like so many other guards from that era, almost nobody outside of Philadelphia would still be talking about him today. Instead, because his prime was short, violent, and packed into a handful of unforgettable playoff nights against the Boston Celtics, his name still makes grown men who once played in the NBA sound uneasy when they say it out loud. The last feeling this story should leave you with is not pure sadness, and it is not pure celebration either. It sits somewhere in between. Even though Andrew Toney's career was cut short far too soon, the fear he created inside some of the toughest competitors basketball has ever seen was not fake. It was not exaggerated by nostalgia or by time. The men who actually had to guard him, night after night, still remember exactly what it felt like to have no answer for him. And when a player can disappear from the public eye for decades, refuse interviews, refuse ceremonies, refuse the spotlight completely, and still make legends like Larry Bird and Danny Ainge sound genuinely wounded when his name comes up, that tells you something numbers alone could never fully explain. Andrew Toney left a mark on the men who faced him that outlasted his career, outlasted his silence, and outlasted every doubt that was ever thrown his way. Most players fade quietly, remembered only by die-hard fans who kept track of old box scores. Andrew Toney did the opposite. He barely played 8 seasons, walked away from the public eye almost completely, and still made grown men, who once stood across from him on a basketball court, sound genuinely rattled decades later. That is not nostalgia talking. That is the lasting weight of fear he built in a short window of time.